There we go. Right. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's great to see you on this sunny Saturday. So welcome to this English Association webinar, where we'll be talking about reading for pleasure in the classroom and exploring the winners of the English 4 to 11 Picture Book Awards for this year. Just want to say a quick thank you to UKLA for hosting us at their conference as well and fitting us into their busy schedule, which we really appreciate. And it's fantastic to have people dialing in as well as people in the room. So we've got a bit of a hybrid thing going on today. So we'll just feel that out and see how it goes. I am going to hand over now to our brilliant speakers, Megan, Teresa and Sarah, if you'd like to introduce yourselves and then carry on. While the talk is happening, if there's any questions that you want to ask, you can always stick them in the chat and I'll field some questions to the speakers as we go on. And if you're having any technical difficulties, pop it in the chat and I'll see if I can help you while things are happening. All right. Thank you very much, Megan. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Becky. Hello, everyone. It's a big welcome from us. We're here in Exeter at the UKLA International Conference, and I'm really, really excited to be here with Professor Teresa Kremer and Dr. Sarah McGowan, and they are both experts in reading for pleasure, reading for engagement, reading for enjoyment, and we thought it would be wonderful to get together and draw on their expertise and explore that in the context of the picture books that have just been awarded first prize, I suppose, in the English 4 to 11 Book Awards. So we really hope to give you an opportunity to explore some of these texts with us and understand a little bit about how you might use them in your classrooms. So if you've got any questions, as Becky said, please put them in the chat. We've got some colleagues with us in the room here, and we're hoping we're going to draw on questions from them as well. So yeah, absolutely, and we'll pick them up a bit later on. What I want to do is to start off by explaining why I'm so excited to have Teresa and Sarah in the same room together. Because for me, both of their research complements each other. So Teresa, she'll explain a lot more about it at the moment. From my perspective, comes very much from an education perspective, so how we enact these things in the classroom. Whereas Sarah is coming much more from a psychological perspective, so how the child thinks about reading, how they think about reading for pleasure, and the skills and attributes and behaviours that they will learn and acquire. So it's like a marriage of two amazing different perspectives, both of which give us a really powerful base on which to think about how we work in the classroom and how we work with children to really encourage that reading for pleasure, reading for engagement, reading for enjoyment. And it's really prescient that we're talking about this just this morning. Charlotte Hacking from the Centre for Literacy in Primary Education shared some really worrying findings about reading for pleasure that had come from the National Literacy Trust, just published recently, and writing for pleasure as well, and how as a nation our children are really at a disadvantage in relation to international comparisons with their international peers. Our children don't in general seem to like reading very much as an external volitional way. They do a lot in school, but not for themselves, and I think we can all agree that that's kind of concerning, and so anything we can do to encourage that is an important piece. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking and let the experts here kind of explain a little bit more, starting with Teresa. Teresa, can you explain what your new thinking and research is about for us?
Thank you for inviting me, and good to be here. Welcome to the colleagues who've joined us this morning. One of the things we've done recently, as a piece of conference we led recently, where we tried to distill and draw together a number of colleagues whose work is in this space, practitioners as well as researchers. And the conference was last Saturday. It was called Book Blether, Sharing the Pleasure Together in Reading. 160 odd teachers, not odd teachers, but teachers joining us on a Saturday, which was brilliant in and of itself. And that work, the day, was drawing on my own work and the work of many other researchers who are highlighting the social nature of reading, the need for conversations around text and recommendations around text to enable readers to be enticed by their peers, by their teachers, by the opportunities that school affords them. Young people want to be connected to one another. They want to relate to one another. And of course, a book gives you a tool to have a conversation that is about me, and maybe about you, or maybe about my dog, or maybe about your hamster, whatever it is that's triggered by the text, or about concerns and issues in the world. And so a lot of the work that we've been exploring more recently, I'm involved in a research study about informal book talk with 4 early years practitioners, looking at how in the really early years, those young people are engaged in book talk without words yet. The embodied engagement of lying on the carpet before school even begins and turning the pages and enjoying and looking and laughing and then revisiting the keywords when Miss read it aloud to us several weeks ago. So we remember the keyword and we all chant the keyword. No disasters to do it. We triggered it. We found the book. School hasn't even started, and yet we're lying there. And we've been filming those teachers engaging, not just before school, but through school, and trying to understand what are the characteristics of the practice in classroom that facilitates that rich engagement with the text, where we also see those young people wanting to take those books home. So that's kind of one key strand, really, and I wanted to focus on another element of that, really, which relates to a new piece of work we've done around picture fiction. So a group of us in lockdown tried to develop linguists as well as educationalists in the OU, tried to develop a picture fiction framework. We're calling it Seeing Beneath the Surface. It really relates to what Charlotte was talking about this morning, about slow looking. We looked at a linguistic analysis and a visual analysis of a range of texts using Halliday's work as systemic functional linguistics, but also Claire Painter's work on the role of picture books, drawing on Kress and Van Leeuwen's research to try and help teachers and help young people notice more, see more, think more about the text they read, because researched evidence across the world would suggest that when we become really engaged in those books and we talk with one another about them, that develops our comprehension, but it also powers our desire to read on, to read more. And so the picture book framework, Seeing Beneath the Surface, which will soon be free on the OU's website, so just borrow it if you want, if it's going to be useful in your classroom, is going to be there to try and help us have richer conversations about what we can see within the layers of any given text, not to evaluate the text, not to do analysis paralysis. Can you see it, tick it? Can you see this? Where are the eyes going, etc.? But to have those richer kind of noticing conversations, which mean we engage more deeply in the narrative or in the character's perspective and power our reading forward. So I hope that gives you a bit of a feel. 2 studies, very exciting.
Very exciting. We'll put a link to your new framework, and we're going to talk about that more, aren't you, as we're going through. It's fantastic. Oh, I love that. Fantastic. Sarah, your work, particularly the Love to Read project, which I have to declare a little bit of a conflict of interest in terms, looks really deeply at how a child embodies reading for pleasure and how the kind of psychological aspects they bring to the process. Can you tell us some more about that?
Yeah, of course. So the Love to Read project was an 18-month project. It just finished a few months ago. Megan was a member of the team, and actually Teresa was on the expert advisory group as well. So both of them had input into the project as it evolved. And the project was a collaborative project between researchers, teachers, children, other professionals such as educational psychologists. But then we also worked with some national literacy and education organisations like the Scottish Book Trust, National Literacy Trust and Education Scotland. And what it was about was really about bringing together the sort of full breadth of knowledge and expertise that we have around reading for pleasure, and how we can I suppose bring that together in order to create a programme to support reading for pleasure in the classroom. And the Love to Read programme was based around 6 research-informed principles, and the principles were really devised from what is quite a complex and rich body of research around reading for pleasure. So not just research from a psychological perspective, but also from an educational, social, cultural, drawing upon, for example, Teresa's research and many others as well. And the 6 principles were those of access, choice, time, connection, social, and success. And I will not go into all of them now because we'll be here all day. But just to give a few highlights, I think the first principle, that of access, is really about quality book provision in school and making sure that children have access to books in school, which reflect their interests, their preferences, their lives, their experiences, but their abilities as well. And it's really about encouraging teachers to really take stock of what provision there was and to weed out any books that maybe children weren't reading anymore, so that they can actually better access books that they may connect with and connect deeply with as well. And the principle of choice was about children developing the skills to choose books that they really connect with. And actually, after taking part in the Love to Read project, teachers were really surprised because they realised that children just didn't have the skills to choose books. And after taking part in the programme, they found that children took a lot longer to choose books. They felt more confident swapping them and not finishing them if they weren't enjoying them, but were actually far more deeply engaged with the books when they did choose to read them. And then skipping forward to the final principle of success, and this is about what it means to be a successful reader. And being a successful reader isn't simply about being able to read lots of books or having good reading skills, but actually being a successful reader is knowing the types of things that you do and don't like, being more confident in choosing books, being able to talk about books or recommend books to others, and choosing to read more at home, for example, as well. So it's really about thinking about the many different ways in which children can and are developing as readers, so that they can kind of see their own journey as readers too. So it's been a wonderful project. I've had lots of expertise and input to it as well. And the programme and all the resources are now available as well. And as part of the project, we worked with an illustrator who helped us to sort of exemplify these different principles too. So we've got lots of fab resources. And we had lots of child input into those illustrations too, which was lovely actually, and lots of fun.
Yeah, and again, we'll put a link to that, to the website and to all the resources that are available. It's really interesting, lots of sort of ways of thinking about this. And I know from my own experience of thinking through these aspects with teachers, practitioners, it's another lens on which to approach these activities and approach conceptualizing children as readers, really being readers who choose to read, who take on board all of this and do it actively and in an engaged way themselves. So a perfect marrying of the two different aspects is so exciting. So we've got the 4 to 11 Picture Book Award books here with us, and we're just going to now sort of have a look at them and think about perhaps ideas about how we might take those on board into the classroom. What I have to say is I've already been going out and about sharing these with teachers. Obviously I didn't share that they were going to win awards, but sharing them and seeing what their reactions are into the classroom as well. So, and universally they've all been very positive, but there are areas, some of the books were teachers were really excited about, and some of them were a bit more reserved about and a bit more thoughtful and a bit more kind of contemplative about, again, which I think is a really powerful choice and brings to that conversation as well that the teachers are readers as well, drawing on Teresa's research very strongly, that teachers are readers and they're part of that conversation in the classroom. And I don't think we should forget that at all. It's a communicative act. So should we start with the books that have won the 4 to 7 category? That's the one. Yeah, absolutely. We've got 2 here. Teresa, would you?
I've got this one, which was, if you can see it clearly, Flooded by Mario Illustrajo, and it's a Frances Lincoln book. It's a debut novel, actually, and she won it as a consequence of the Masters in Children's Book in Illustration. Engaged in. It's really interesting. It's black and white basically, which is kind of unusual in itself. If I just give you a kind of a flick of the page, but you see blue too, swathes of blue wavering through, and of course with a title like Flooded, you know what the blue is. There's also a lemon snake, or a kind of a brownish snake that runs through the piece too. Let me give you a kind of feel for this rather extraordinary book. The animals, the characters really, are the citizens in an ordinary city. So there are no humans in this book, it's all animals, or the humans are depicted as animals, put it that way. It's an ordinary day, the animals going about their ordinary lives, and no one's noticing that something is happening. And that water is creeping in. It starts being damp at the beginning in the early pages, and then you can well imagine the water rises as we go through the book. And the animals respond in different ways. Most of them don't notice it to start with. In fact, almost nobody notices except one. Later on in the book, as the water rises, characters like the giraffes, shall we say, are not so worried about the whole process because, quite frankly, they're nice and tall and they can survive. For some, it wasn't a problem. You can see that. With the giraffes up the top, but for others, there are underneath there's a monkey with an oxygen tank on his back, and he's saying, "Hello up there, could someone help me?" So you can see as the water rises, animals look after themselves, others reach out and say, "Can you help me?" And help isn't offered. So they get wetter or they're getting wetter and wetter. There's some kind of tiny bits of conversation, not very much. There's some kind of rumor that politicians may be to blame about this, which is kind of interesting given the current context. Perhaps there's kind of some damp problem going on that kind of make conversations with one another, some of the animals, about what could be the problem here. And I don't want to kind of give it all away because somehow it's spoiling the book that will be well worth reading and poring over every page. But it is the case that eventually, shall we say, unsurprisingly, since it's a children's book, the challenge of the flood is responded to by the collective. And there are very strong messages about the environment in here, about the challenge of procrastinating over everything, ignoring the problem, and indeed, potentially, obviously, of working together to solve it in some way. So it's a very rich read. In Jane Duden, Charlotte Hacking was talking in one of her keynotes, or the keynote this morning, Jane Dunan's work in fiction books, where she uses the phrase, "every mark matters." And this is a book where you want to go look again and again at the marks made, at the language used. There's a picture here with a group of them, many of whom are wearing jam jars on their head or bubbles because the water's rising and rising and rising. And between them, they're saying, "We need to do something." But they don't know what to do. So I do recommend it. I'm not surprised at all that it was an award winner. What did your teachers think when you?
When they first looked at it, in general, often what they thought was they read it and they thought, "Oh, that's a nice story." And then with a little bit of prompt, said, "Well, did you look at the quite subtle conversations that we're having through the characters?" So that they read it again, and another layer came out, and then they started to look closer at the pictures themselves. So we kind of layers of thinking that went through, and I think that's really powerful and really interesting in terms of how you could work with a class. So every time you're sharing that with a class, you're addressing a different aspect. You're looking at it. First of all, it's just what happens in this story and the obvious ecological issues, that opportunity to really talk about these things and help children process or explore some of the things that I think are quite worrying for them at the moment. And then there's how it's crafted, how it's drawn, how the characters relate to each other, and all sorts of kind of really fascinating conversations could come from it. For me, and certainly for the teachers I've been working with, it's a book that would, there's at least a week's worth of rereading and a week's worth of more things to talk about, not just sharing the story again. Teresa's at the moment, she's just fiddling. There's a big open spread that's really exciting that you don't necessarily kind of realise.
Not going to share.
No, we're not going to share that. You'll need to buy it and find out. So yeah, definitely worth having a look at, and I think one to share on a regular basis. So there's huge PHSE elements coming through that too as well.
I think probably too, it's worth saying that it would be a lovely book for several children to pour around. So I would like to read it to my class, but I'd like them to see it more closely. Unless I've got to visualize it, it's not going to come across in the same way. You need to get close to be on the page. So 3 kids who are really interested, poring over it and rereading, they'll notice the skunk, for example, can follow the raccoon or look at the mouse and see him on every page and what he's doing and who he's talking to or not, and how he's responding and what he does in the end. So there are lots of journeys of different animals, not just the giraffe being politically dominant.
And of course, with that, as Teresa's pointed out, huge opportunities for vocabulary development as well. So I'd say it's one that you maybe want to buy 5 or 6 copies and have floating around so children can consistently pour and come through with it. Thanks. The non-fiction choice, the non-fiction award winner, Sarah Scott here, is Sarah, would you?
So this is Invertebrates Are Cool. So I had the pleasure of reading both of the non-fiction winners. And I think when we think about research, a lot of the research around children's emotional experiences with books, or their enjoyment with books. So much of it is centered around fiction book reading.
Yeah.
And I must admit I'm at fault with that as well, and I'm becoming a real champion for non-fiction books. And I know that for many children, non-fiction is what they're drawn to as well.
Yeah.
So it's really, really nice to have the opportunity to be able to read this book and to share, I suppose, some of my thoughts about it. So I think, I mean, throughout the book, obviously, there are some beautiful illustrations. I'm not sure if you can see these.
Yeah.
But there's also lots of different examples of things that children can do. For example, create their own wormery, or watch snails and watch slugs. And I think it's a really nice way for children to pay a little bit more attention to nature and to feel more connected to nature, and to understand the types of environments that different types of insects and creatures need in order to survive, in order to thrive as well. So that could be, you know, picking up a plant pot and seeing wood lice scurrying around in the damp conditions. But I think any book that sort of prompts children to think a little bit more deeply about the small insects that are around them and the nature that's around them as well, I think is really important.
Yeah.
And then, of course, invertebrates aren't just slugs and snails, but they also include octopus and squid and crabs as well. So it also helped children to make the connection between other types of life too. So yeah, it was just a really lovely book, and I think certainly pitched at the right age in terms of 4 to 7-year-olds. And of course, non-fiction books always introduce children to all types of vocabulary that they just won't encounter in their everyday lives. These aren't the types of things that we talk about in day-to-day conversations. So there's lots of opportunities for new language learning as well.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the teachers that I shared it with were delighted, because obviously mini beasts, small creatures, is perfect for early years classrooms and moving into Key Stage 2. And this one is very accurate in terms of the facts and the ideas that it represents, but shares them in a a really lovely way. It's written by Nicola Davis.
Yeah, she has a degree in zoology.
Yeah, so it's very, very accurate, which is great. And again, Teresa was saying there's an opportunity to look really closely and to notice things about the very careful drawings that perhaps will lend children to look more closely when they go outside and find these things for themselves. So yeah, certainly the early years teachers in the groups that I've worked with were like, oh, perfect, off we go. So again, another really powerful acquisition to any school library and to lots of classrooms in terms of introducing children in a really friendly, colourful and fascinating and way that will draw them into exploring some of these things, because we all know that I know many classrooms, particularly at this time of year, where there's nothing better than going outside with some magnifying glasses and a bucket and a pooter, to collect small wiggly things. That's fantastic. So yeah, absolutely. So we've got those two really lovely books. Not surprising that they're winners at all. Valuable acquisitions to any classroom and to any school library. So if we move on to the next category, so the 7 to 11 category, we've got a book that, from my perspective as a fiction, the teachers I shared them with were a little bit on the fence about it. Some adored it and some found it very challenging. Teresa, what are your thoughts about it?
Okay, this is the book we're talking about, which is Paradise Sands, A Story of Enchantment by Levi Pinfold. It's Walker Studio book, so there's an enormous amount of resource been put in here to make a very high quality, mesmerizing, visually engaging text. I think before we discuss it, I'd like to read the poem, which is on the opening page. Paradise Sands, a story of enchantment. White roses we follow towards Teller's horror. Dead earth to a spring, the house of a king. A sip from the chalice, we enter his palace. Break bread for the keeper, now we descend deeper. Wash clean in his pool, we fall under his rule. Away from what is, we are all now his. Which is the kind of foreboding, and that poem is woven through into the text, both in the voice of the mother of the little girl who is the protagonist of the tale, and her and her brothers are on a journey to visit their mother in what appears to be a challenging circumstance at the end of the book, And on that journey, they stop to gather some white flowers or roses for her. And in the process, they find a hotel, a kind of hotel with strange and mythic proportions, as it were. And the boys, her brothers, are tempted to go in the door, tempted to swim in the water, tempted to eat from the wonderful food that's displayed. And so they drink and eat and make merry, as it were, enjoy themselves. And she doesn't. She holds back. She says, we should leave. And gradually, or eventually, she meets the teller, who is this enormous lion creature you can see on the front cover there, with that very heavy shadow showing into there too. And she wants her brothers back. Her brothers have gone. They have become this powerful teller. I'm not going to tell the entire tale, but she had to make a bargain with him, as many of our folklore tales. There's a kind of bargain to be had, the 3 wishes or whatever. And he says, well, you can stay here for 3 days and 3 nights, but you must not eat and you must not drink. And if you don't, your brothers can come back to you. I will no longer own them. And so the girl tries to keep up her side of that bargain. Can she neither eat? Can she not drink? Can she know her brothers again in human form, as they've been transformed? It's a really brilliantly evoked text. To me, it's really top end, Key Stage 2 or even Key Stage 3, more securely perhaps in 3. It is a very powerful book, one you don't forget, and you want to keep going back to. There's deep ambiguity and lots of elements, so we could debate for ages with any class what's going on here. The issues, the themes which Levi Pinfold is exploring relate to family relationships, mental health, power, really, the power that the teller has. Who is this teller? Where does he come from? And sacrifice, as well as overcoming adversity. Now, I don't want to make it sound too heavy, but in a way it is that kind of edgy, dark book. That's what Pinfold does best, in my view. And Black Dog, which you probably know already, and then illustrations from The Dam and other books. So it's a really engaging. It has won not only this award, but it has also won 2 other awards that I know of.
Yeah.
So it's, it's going to be an award winner, and it's a book to go look, explore, think about how you might use.
Yeah, definitely. I think from what Teresa's explained now, you can understand why certainly the teachers I am working with were a little bit on the fence. Some of them felt that it would be great for their Key Stage 2 classes, Year 6 classes in particular, and some were a little bit more reluctant and perhaps thought that it would be harder for their classes to engage in. So I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. I know you can't see justice here. It is absolutely gorgeous. The pictures, the attention to detail is amazing, but it does deal with some quite dark subjects, and I think it would be very much around you choosing it to work with children in a very careful and sensitive way. And you might approach it and think this is not right for this class. I'm very much in agreement with Teresa around Key Stage 3 texts as well. I mean, and there are huge, looking at it, huge literary and artistic elements. I mean, obviously we've got elements to the Last Supper there, reflections, cultural aspects that you could really take forward. So yeah, I'm not at all surprised that it's won. I think it's a book that would go forever, almost in a way. But yeah, it would be fascinating to see it and work more closely with a group of children for whom it is really, you would consider it would be really powerful. And to see how they respond to it. Yeah, I am myself personally very taken with it, but I can understand why.
Can I comment? I mean, I looked at it through the lens of the new picture fiction framework, the picture book framework that we looked at. And one of the elements we look at, unsurprisingly, is characters, how they're depicted, how they're described. And if we look at that particular, the little girl, her brothers are all named. Her mother is Mother, at least. The teller is the lion, the teller, capital T, capital T. The girl is nameless throughout. She's very often on the left side of the page. She's always smaller than everybody else throughout. And she's not only smaller than her brothers, but she's got a kind of diminutive height in relation to the teller. The power relation is extremely strong. And yet she is the person who saves. She is determined. She is looks despairing most of the time. So the kind of bleak sense of, oh, come on, you can do it, as it were. And so if you look closely at the way he has created her character, both in the way of the depiction, but also the language that's used, I watched them drink deeply. She says, direct speech, I think we should leave, but everybody ignores her because they've already been sucked in because we are his. They have drunk and they have eaten of his bounty and they are now owned. And she says, I called for help, my cries answered only by echoes. So if we use the picture fiction framework to zoom in on particular aspects, we learn more about the way in which Penfolds has positioned her and then enables her to be the rescuer, as it were, at the end of that journey. It's just really interesting. It merits close looking, slow looking, and attention to the features of the framework. Particularly, I think this book, it suits power relations and the examination of power relations. Yeah. And how powerful is she at the very end? There's a very kind of interesting twist at the end. Yeah. How powerful is she left? Then is there a question mark about her power? So yeah, I recommend it.
Yeah, definitely. Huge food for thought. But I think what you're saying there as well, Teresa, is this isn't a book to just pick up and read. This needs thought before you approach it with a class and with children, because you need to think about it through the lens of the children and their experiences as well, and how you might mediate some of these conversations with them about power, about all of these kind of quite troublesome but really important issues that it might raise. So yeah, I mean, goodness me, it's very clear why it won. Yeah, very much so. Something a bit lighter, yes. Sarah. We've got here another winner, and I hesitate to say that this is non-fiction because it kind of sits in the middle, doesn't it?
Yeah. So yeah. These books, I mean, just listening to you talk about that book, the books that have won are just so different and so diverse in many ways. So this is going to be a much lighter discussion about what I thought was a brilliant book.
And it's called
Real Life Dragons and the Stories of Their Survival
by Anita
Garnier and Yunnan Yu.
Yeah.
And it's published by Wayland, and it is a story of 10 different types of dragons. So you have the Komodo dragon, the flying dragon, dragon snake, dragonfly, sea dragons as well. So I think there's something for every child within this. I think every child is going to find at least one of the dragons that they really love within the story. So you've got dragons of the sea, the land, and the air as well. And within each of the pictures, you have a sort of photograph of the type of dragon, and then within it you have some information about each one as well. And I have to say the information is just written in a really interesting and engaging way. It's the types of questions that children would ask, because very often with non-fiction books they can be quite dry, and children are always curious and they always ask questions, and those answers are never in the books. But for this one, I really felt like the content was so interesting and so engaging for children too. And for me, I think this book really took me into like, what next? Like, what could you do with this book? And I think there's lots of different directions that you could go with it afterwards. So one may be sort of creative writing or writing a poem. So which was your favorite dragon within it? Would you like to write a story about them or a poem about them as well? And I think that would give children a lot of autonomy or choice. You know, they pick their favorites and then they choose what to do with that. And I think there's lots of ways to think about links across the curriculum as well. So looking about where these dragons are in the world and thinking about geography as well. Thinking as well about how dragons are represented in art, in drama, in culture, but also within buildings and architecture too. So this morning I was looking at dragon-inspired buildings, and it's actually really interesting to think about the relationship between our natural environment and our built environment too, and actually how natural environment sometimes inspires the architecture and the built environment, but that there's a tension between the two of them as well. And so I think you could just use this book to inspire lots of different discussions. And dragons are just quite cool, I think. Yeah, I think children like them. So yeah, absolutely. So I really think that there's something for everyone within this book. I think there's lots of potential to take this book in lots of different directions. And I love books that do that start you in one place, and then all of a sudden you're looking and you're thinking about lots of other things as well. And so I'd highly recommend this book for primary school classrooms.
Yeah, and certainly the teachers that I've shown it to and where it's with were absolutely taken by it, not least actually because it's very clever in that it represents and talks about dragons, and they are real creatures, they're real live animals, but it introduces a vast range of different types of text. So there's a story element to it, a kind of fictional legend almost about those different animals. There's a very clear kind of scientific rationale. There's some very beautiful labeled diagrams with high levels of vocabulary. So it's a kind of, it all encompasses. And Komodo dragons, what's there not to like? They are dinosaurs, sort of ancient dinosaurs. So yeah, very, very powerful and very beautiful. And the sort of thing, again, it's quite a meaty text. There's lots in it, and it would benefit. And I could see that when just children hugging it and fighting over it, and it always being that book that's taken out of the library, or you find it snaffled away under in a children's bag because they're just poring over it and going back to it again and again and again and again. Absolutely beautiful. I would recommend it hugely. The last one I've got here is this one. It's Narwhal or Narwhal. Narwhal. Thank you. We've got some help from the audience here. The Arctic Unicorn by Justin Anderson and illustrated by Joe Weaver. It's a Walker book publication, and this is a little bit more of your kind of traditional sort of non-fiction picture book series. Obviously, it's the story of these amazing creatures, the unicorns of the sea. Unicorns are big. Yeah. The unicorns are big at the moment in schools. This is about the real live one, so that's great. It's not pink, it's not glittery, and it has no stars. So that's fantastic. And it just talks about, almost in a way, in a very lyrical and narrative way, the life cycle of these amazing creatures and what we know about them. Of course, there's links with the Arctic, links with the environment, all sorts of lovely things going on. But again, in that kind of a little bit more sort of traditional sort of narrative picture book sort of way, I wonder if you can see this. What we've got here is the wonderful text, the very evocative pictures, the story narrative going on up here, and then down here, non-fiction, telling you very precise, clear narrative effects. And in that way that Walker Books, I think, does it incredibly well. Additional bits at the back about further information, about, leading off in lots of different lots of different areas. Again, I can see this being a very powerful start to lots and lots of rich discussions for children. And the illustrations are very evocative. They're quite, I want to say, smudgy. So it's almost like you're seeing what's happening underneath the sea, and adds to that mystery of these animals that I'm not sure we know a lot about. So yeah, I can see children being really, really taken by it, and really kind of grabbed by it. And again, opportunities for huge, rich and range of discussions coming on. So I don't know if you two have any thoughts about this one at all, or.
No, I honestly don't know answer.
No.
Comment, but as you say, unicorns are hugely popular.
Yes, they are.
So expanding one's understanding of unicorns
is always great.
Yeah.
This one, as you can see, I've got a hardback copy here. So the softback copy isn't published yet. So yeah, this is definitely one to watch out for. But if you were thinking about this and you've got a topic around dragons and mini or whatever, then this would be a nice one to sort of have in a bit more of your kind of, I want to say, traditional themed non-fiction kind of picture book opportunity for children. Very, very, very beautiful. So there we have it. The winners, all of them would be really valuable in your classroom, but I'm gonna challenge our two experts here to choose one. If they had to choose one, because they've got a very small budget and we all have small budgets in school, if they had to choose one, which one? Teresa, which one would you have? Which one would work best out of all five? Which one would work best perhaps as a starting point for teachers who wanted to begin to use your picture book frame?
I think I would probably say either Flooded, then I'm not allowed to choose one, having two, either Flooded or Paradise Sands. But in a sense, this book is quite remarkable. Yeah. And even if You don't, I mean, I wouldn't use it in any class except year 6 in primary personally, although others might well know their class well enough to do so. I just think it's one of those rather unusual, unique texts, which is going to give us all plenty of scope for not only discussion, but also kind of space to think, space to revisit and explore. And why is she so frail? And why are these flowers so important? And when do we give flowers? And how is mum? And what's going to happen when this young lass has grown up? There are lots of ambiguities. I do love a book that leaves us open with so many questions unanswered. And they are not answered, and we have to interpret. Yeah. So I think I'd choose this personally, and it would work brilliantly with the framework, which asks questions about focal eye engagement, well, a whole range of questions, 4 key quartets around 4 core questions really around how we see beneath the surface and understand more deeply.
Fantastic. Sarah, which one would you have?
So that sounds wonderful, but I think for something a little bit lighter, I would probably pick Real Life Dragons, because for me, I can just imagine all children finding at least one, maybe even more dragons in there that they would really love. And I just saw so much potential to take this book and go in all kinds of directions with it afterwards. So I think that's definitely a book that every primary school class should have.
And for me, one of the things I'm increasingly thinking about with the teachers that I'm working with and the schools that I'm working with and in my own research is about the link between reading and writing. And so I think I'd have to go for this one, for Flooded, because I think for early years and primary and Key Stage 1 classrooms, I can see huge opportunities for bringing drama into the classroom to enact it. I can see huge opportunities for lots and lots of rich discussions, lots of storytelling, lots of oral language development opportunities, and then links to allowing children to have that opportunity to discuss things that I know are of concern to them, but in a sort of around the environment and around challenges that they faced in life recently and things that bother them and worry them, and to be able to understand how a narrative builds up through the picture books as well. So I think, you know, yes, I absolutely love Real Life Dragons. I absolutely love Paradise Sands, but I really like this one too. And I think, you know, the clarity of the pictures, the fact that they're principally black and white with just a wash of color, I can think of 100 things we could do in the classroom to explore and extend and unpick and develop that further. So I think it would definitely be, I think, this one, and I have already done that. So there we go. Working with colleagues to kind of explore that a little bit further. So yeah, amazing. So I think, you know, we've come to the end of our webinar, unless we've got any questions from
there are a couple of questions in the chat, actually, Megan, if we could get to that. So first of all, Pauline commented that Paradise Sands reminded her of The Tunnel by Anthony Brown, which I hadn't heard of, so I'm going to go off and Google that. So thank you very much, Pauline.
You'll like it.
Yeah, you will. And in fact, all of Anthony Brown's, I mean, Charlotte Hacking was talking about Voices in the Park this morning, which is a massive favourite. And again, there's those different voices that come through, aren't there? Different perspectives, different language.
And that whole kind of Hansel and Gretel echoes in here, very folkloric.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, we agree completely. Yeah, so maybe together, maybe there's a bit of a collection here as well of books around a similar theme, or books that position characters in a similar way. So you could start off perhaps using a picture book framework with this text, move on to The Tunnel, move on to others. Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you. And Joanna also asked a really good question about Paradise Sands, which is, and I'll just quote this directly. She says, I worry that Paradise Sands may promote eating disorders. Could you tell me how you would present it not to encourage people avoiding eating, which is quite a big part of the story, isn't it? Is avoiding the food and drink.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think it is a big part of the story, but it depends on what parts of the story we want to bring to attention. And are we looking for stories that kind of carry a message and we're trying to drill the message? or are we looking at the way in which the picture book is constructed in words and pictures and paying attention to, you know, how the messages are conveyed? Because there are other messages there about love and about relationships. She stands up for her brothers. She perseveres against, so she's denying herself in order to give to them. So I think it would be an interesting issue to kind of try and say, what's the theme I'm wanting to surface with my class? And then what pages, because you obviously would never use any framework, let alone our PB framework, to analyze the text to death. We're not trying to analyze it, we're trying to understand it. We're trying to promote dialogue and conversation. So it's not analysis paralysis. It's about, you know, surfacing. And so if you know what you're trying to surface, which is her love, perhaps for her brothers, her commitment to family, then we might start by talking about our brothers and sisters in the first place and frame our entire exploration of the book around our connections with the people we care for, either family or friends or whatever. So that when we come to the text, we're already aligned, you know, with our own prior knowledge being activated, not about eating, but about love and caring. So I kind of angle it in response to that.
Yeah, and I suppose that as prefaced by, again, we've said that I think you'd be very careful about the classes that you choose to discuss this book with and to introduce it with. It's not one that I would have, I think, necessarily on general display. It's not something that I would add in a class library. I would use it in a very particular way. But I also think that we can't not talk about these things. And I think that in very subtle and very sensitive ways, if a child draws attention to that within a conversation around the text, then perhaps we need to think carefully about how we would position that and what the position of our school is. As a school leader, I would want to have a conversation with my teachers around what we say when these things happen, and how we position it and how we approach it, and what are the steps in terms of a safeguarding mechanism that we go through, because we can't escape the fact that we have children, even in a primary context, where these issues are at play. These are very serious mental health disorders, and we can't ignore it. We can't stick it under the table and just pretend it's not happening. So I think that's a lesson we've learned during COVID. As a head during COVID myself, one of the things I learned very quickly is that we have to be honest about what's going on and share it in a way that's not going to scare, because actually the worst thing we can do is not do that, because the imagination that the children bring to it and the conclusions that they bring to it are far more scary for them than not.
Can I just add that I think it's a really important point. There's some recent research which suggests that teachers are hesitant to use powerful picture fiction in particular that deal with big world issues because they're not sure how. Anti-racist baby, for example, and many others. And there'll be teachers who look at this and go, I'm not sure, do I need to spend money on that? Because I'm not sure how I'm going to handle it. And I think we need to help each other achieve that. And your comment there was, you know, as a head teacher, you'd be wanting to support staff in. So if you think the book is worth, and I do believe it is, examination with Key Stage Top End 2 and 3, but I think it's about dialoguing with colleagues near you and, you know, in the next door classroom and so on, and perhaps with your head. But, you know, how would they handle it? What would they do? What kinds of conversations might we trigger, so that we support one another on that journey rather than back away and say, well, only stay with the safe things, and the real world's a hard place and you've got to face it on your own without the power of literature to support you. That's not good enough. We need the literature to put the arm around to help you have the dialogue. So I think it's just, I would reach out to somebody else if your school doesn't have a policy around exploring those issues and say, how would you do this? What might you do? Just in case it came up.
And, you know, I think as well, I suppose with my head teacher hat on, you know, if there were concerns, perhaps this is something that you would have a sensitive conversation with parents about before you introduced it. Introduce it, say this is what the text is, and give parents, you know, the opportunity and the heads up to say, actually, at the moment, I don't think I don't want my child involved in that kind of conversation. And of course, that's absolutely fine. But I agree 100% with Teresa. One of the reasons that we read, and one of the reasons that fiction is so important, is it gives us an access and a view to other worlds and gives us a way of processing other worlds. I mean, that's why children were told stories right in the beginning, isn't it? You know, we told them morals about how to live their life. Don't don't speak to strangers, because what happens if you speak to strangers? They lock you up in a gingerbread house and eat you.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. It's about engaging with our fears and finding a way around them and finding a way to come to terms with them. And I think, again, as COVID has shown us, we might be better at doing that. I agree with Teresa that, you know, we owe it to our children and our young people to have these conversations.
When we work with teachers, they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Which is why you end up with collections and schools that children don't engage.
Yeah.
For each pleasure or find themselves in, because they might not be, there's not a budget. So there's that fear of not spending your budget correctly.
Yeah.
So we almost never see Key Stage 2 upload teacher book in Book Corner.
So I'm just going to for the audience who are joining us on screen, I know you can't hear that as we've got comments from our colleagues in the room, and you're talking about, do you think it's hard for teachers to, particularly in uppercase stage 2, perhaps hard for teachers to source and find books that start to address some of these challenges, or give the opportunity for talking to curate them, to identify them? My own personal feeling is yes, it probably is. I think your colleagues comment as well about never seeing picture books or graphic novels in Key Stage 2 classrooms. Yes, I completely agree. I've just worked with a number of schools and said, we need to, let's expand, shall we? Because there's a whole host of new and really amazing stories out there that address all sorts of issues, not just issues around eating disorders, but neurodiversity, diversity in general, the environment, lots of which are graphic novels, lots of which are picture books.
I think one way, and just giving people suggestions of ways forward, would be to go for award winners. This is a great selection of award-winning books. But if you go to the Open University's Reading Pleasure website, we do annually a summary of all the books that have won that year. It's usually open up, it's just a Word document, but you can see the winners from the Laugh Out Loud Awards. You can see the winners from Blue Peter, from 4 to 11, from the Spark Award, which we now sponsor. So looking at the range that year, and indeed looking at last year's, and the year again, all in paper, cheaper than something. And so that gives you a kind of starting place. And then I would say invite yourselves, and indeed the teachers you're working with, to join the Teachers Reading Challenge. It's a joint initiative by the Reading Agency and the OU, and just invites you to read 6 books across the summer. 6 picture fiction more, probably going to take you 25 minutes. So you've got 25 minutes to give to the kids and your own literary repertoire. You might go back to reread those, but then you could create a poster. Well, you don't create it, it's there for you. You can pop the books on the poster and then display that on your book door, saying, this is why I read it across the summer. What did you read? So that you're able to share with staff and you get the librarian to support you if you've got an in-school librarian or a local librarian to make other recommendations to widen that repertoire. So that you feel more confident and your colleagues feel more confident making recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fundamental as well, isn't it? In terms of access, in terms of modelling to children about how they will choose books that they want to access, in terms of you having a kind of powerful repertoire of text that you can draw on. I mean, the other thing that I do all the time is I've been carrying all these books around in my bag when I'm visiting schools and working with teachers for about last month. And I, before we even start talking about any of the stuff that we need to talk about, I say, oh, look, let's have a look at some of these. And we spend 10 minutes sharing and just go, oh my God, that's really nice. Oh, I really like that one. And use things like the Centre for Literacy and Primary Education, Core Books Online website as well, with lots of recommendations, really powerful. But yeah, thank you. Such a brilliant question. Sonia, I can see your question. Who wrote The Flood? If I hold that up really carefully, can you?
Estrajo.
Go on then, Teresa.
No, I'm just kidding. It's hard to spell, so it's better to put it up there. Mariajo Estrajo is correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm sure that's how you say it. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce it. I think it's probably Spanish.
Oh, do you?
You don't get that ending in Italian. I do know that one. I do the Italian one. Okay, fantastic. Any more questions there, Becky?
No, just to add, everyone who's asked for links to the various frameworks and pieces of research, we will pop those up when we add the recording of this session to the website, and I'll email everybody to let you know when that's available. So just hang on and it'll be coming your way in the next couple of days.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to colleagues in the room. Big thank you to Teresa and Sarah. Hooray! I would really encourage you to access all of their research. Really, really powerful. Obviously, there's the Open University Research Rich Pedagogies Reading for Pleasure website, which is so big now.
Yes, it's huge.
It's enormous. Vast amount of things to explore, and certainly and the Love to Read project as well is really exciting, and lots to explore and lots to think about. Thank you very much for joining us on this Saturday morning, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Becky.